Hello, Beaufort County. Welcome back once again to County Talk. I am your host, Gary Ceres. This is episode 2, The New School. If you remember last time, we set up the principal players on the Commissioner Board and the Board of Election. This episode, we will discuss the new school, which Hood has made into a hot topic. Roughly 3 years ago, Mr. Frankie Waters, the Beaufort County Board of Commissioners chairman, saw where the state had been using lottery funds to build new schools. Several new schools were being built in counties surrounding Beaufort County. Mr. Waters approached a school board member and asked them to look into it. So, it was originated by Chairman Frankie Waters, not Dr. Cheeseman, the superintendent of Beaufort Schools. However, Mr. Hood Richardson would have you believe otherwise. So the application was filled out and submitted. At this point, there was no money for studies or surveys. Can you imagine if money was spent on surveys before the grant was even awarded? So a year ago, there was a joint meeting between the Board of Commissioners and the school board. Also present was Catherine Truitt, who was at the time the superintendent of public instruction for the state of North Carolina. The meeting was to be an informational gathering, but Mrs. Truitt felt the need was so great that she went ahead and awarded $42 million out of the Educational State Lottery Fund for Beaufort County schools for the construction of a brand new school. The key reasons was the savings that would be realized by combining the two schools and for school safety. Roll the tape.
Well, I appreciate that you took the time to run those numbers, and I know that consolidation can be a difficult decision, but in the case of Beaufort County, as it relates specifically to other applications that have come to the department, as well as the legislative mandate that we consider alongside county tier status, which is important, as well as a county's ability to generate tax revenue, I am very happy to let you all know that you have been awarded $42 million.
Only Hood Richardson and Stan Dethridge spoke out in opposition. Part of the agreement for the county of Beaufort was that the commissioners would contribute $10 million to the project. This was voted on and confirmed in a 5-2 vote. Mr. Richardson and Mr. Dethridge voted against the funding. There would be a primary election in March and the general election in November. Mr. Richardson chose to make this a campaign issue. He cares about nothing for school safety or efficiency. He only cares about his political aspirations, his re-election, and the election of his candidates. If the election went his way, he would be able to stop the new school. So now that the money was in place, the proper studies were made, forms were filled out and sent in. The forms justified the need for the new school. These are the forms that Mr. Richardson said were never done. However, we all know otherwise. Now I ask you, do you think honestly that the state would be sending us $42 million if we didn't fill out proper forms? About this time, the survey was taking place. It was discovered that a portion of the property that was needed for the school was owned by the city. The discrepancy didn't even show up on the county's GIS maps. It was an honest mistake. The area was needed for a corner of the building and a retention pond. The retention pond is where water runoff goes to seep into the ground. It acts almost like a filter. The schools maintained this property for over 40 years. When the school approached the city about the property, the city of Washington suggested that they would just donate the property to the schools. This was somewhere around the late spring of 2024. So the progress continued, and the thought was that the city would just donate the property. Also, I should mention that the primary took place. Mr. Richardson and some of his candidates advanced to the November general election. But despite spending thousands of dollars in an attempt to control both the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Education, he was unable to take over neither the Board of Commissioners nor the school board. The plans for the new school were being prepared by Height and Associates. They were the architects for this project. The folks at Height met with the teachers, principals, and maintenance to design a building that everyone would be proud of. The school sponsored several public meetings to share the results. Mr. Richardson attended only but a few of these meetings. Mr. Dethridge attended none. The school board was satisfied with the plans, and the bid packets were sent out to certified contractors so that bids could be received. The bids were opened on November 13th, 2024. WIMCO was the lowest bidder. WIMCO was awarded the contract at a school board meeting in December. So while all this was going on, at the same time the city seemed to be dragging their feet on getting the property deeded over to the schools. Suddenly they said they wanted to trade the property out for John Small's school. Next they said they wanted to trade it for the P.S. Jones Park off of the Bridge Street. Finally, they wanted to trade it for Kugler Field. Buying the property at the time was not an option. Beaufort County Schools reached out several times to have a joint meeting between the City Council of Washington and the school board. The school board even asked the county commissioners to become involved. The commissioners said they did not want to be involved. No commissioner attended any of these meetings. Finally, the city agreed to a meeting between the chairman, vice chairman, and superintendent of the school, as well as with the city, represented by Mayor Donald Sadler, the mayor pro tem, and the city attorney. However, the mayor would not meet with both full boards. It is my opinion that the mayor did not want to meet with the full boards because he did not want his members to be influenced by the school board. It became apparent that the city was only interested in P.S. Jones. The city was not willing to compromise on any solution. The schools started to look for other options. One of the options would have been to move the maintenance building so that there would be room for the retention pond. However, this was unavailable because the plans would have to be redesigned and the entire applications process would have to be redone. Not only would this add years and additional cost to the project, it might put the $42 million awarded through the State Education Lottery Fund in jeopardy, so this was not an option. The school board publicly discussed a plan to move the maintenance building at the end of Pennsylvania Ave. This would have provided a space for the retention pond, but it would have been way too expensive to move that building. It is my opinion that this is the discussion that led the mayor to decide on two options. One was to trade the property for the P.S. Jones Park, which he wanted, and the other was for the city simply to sell the property. The trade the property option would have needed a survey and a property appraisal. If there was a difference between the property appraisal and the selling price, the city would have to pay the difference. The school board felt that this was an option the city would not want to do and agreed to purchasing the property as the easiest option. The land swap would have delayed the entire project. Interestingly enough, this was the fiscally irresponsible position that Hood Richardson wanted to do. The city offered the property at $600,000. The schools countered with $500,000. This was the amount that was ultimately agreed upon. So you ask, where would the money come from? Beaufort County schools get a portion of sales tax that come to Beaufort County from the state. The schools over the years have managed to save $250,000 from these proceeds. They needed, of course, another $250,000. This is where they involved the Beaufort County Board of Commissioners. They met to see if they could get an advance on their future tax disbursements from the sales tax. They needed the additional $250,000 to allow them to meet the $500,000 asking price from the City of Washington. In a 4-3 vote, the commissioners approved this announcement. Mr. Richardson and Mr. Dethridge voted against the funding. The county would be paid back using future sales tax proceeds. The city attorney wrote up the agreement for the purchase of the property. This included a title search. The agreement has been signed and filed with the Register of Deed. The construction was started on time and on schedule despite Mr. Richardson's best efforts to stall the process. With the exception of the $250,000 advancement, the Beaufort County Board of Commissioners really had no business with these negotiations, and they actually stayed out of all the negotiations. Ultimately, the question comes up as to why Mr. Hood Richardson wants to sabotage the new school. We have seen where he has spoken out in opposition to Mrs. Truitt, the former Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of North Carolina, when she awarded the $42 million in lottery funds. Roll the tape.
I would like to be heard. Hood Richardson, Beaufort County Commissioner. There's not been a study done to determine whether consolidating this school is in the best interest of Beaufort County or not. The public was never involved in this process. A few politicians got together in the back room and made this decision. We're going to tear down 2 perfectly good school buildings that are in use today. I would point out that everybody in this room that's cackling is employed by the school board, and if they don't cackle, they're going to be fired.
Mr. Richardson consistently berates Dr. Cheeseman, the school superintendent. Dr. Cheeseman represents the board, who directs him at their discretion. Mr. Richardson would have you believe that it is the other way around. If you watch the clip, you'll see from March that Mr. Richardson talks about Dr. Cheeseman wanting to move the maintenance building so that he can create a pristine campus. What does this even mean? Roll the tape.
So the whole thing stinks to high heaven because what the superintendent was wanting to do was to tear down the service buildings that are over on the campus where the Eastern Elementary School is going to be built so he could have a pristine campus and make himself look good. Well, that's another $7 million. It's about $5 million to tear the buildings down and another $2 million in other expenses.
Note that the amount that Mr. Richardson cites for moving the maintenance building is completely fabricated and inflated. Mr. Richardson pulled that figure out of thin air, or even better, he pulled it out of his. So it is my opinion that Mr. Richardson is already at work to influence the next election in 2 years. Remember, he only needs one more vote to control both the school board and one more vote to control the Board of Commissioners. This must never happen. The new school should be completed before this next election. The delay would surely involve cost overruns and would be fiscally irresponsible. Mr. Richardson would be able to campaign that everyone currently in office is incompetent and only he and his candidates can fix the problems. Once he takes over these boards, He can control everything from personnel and policy in the entire county to the curriculum in the school. The question is, do you want Hood Richardson to run your county and raise your children? If you like what you've seen and heard today on today's broadcast, please remember to subscribe or like this podcast so that you may follow us on future broadcasts.